behalf of the Raza Foundation and the India Habitat Center, we welcome you this evening to 7th Kumar Gandharva Memorial Lectures. For nearly a decade now, we have been organizing these annual memorial lectures on music, theatre, dance, visual arts, literature, cinema, architecture. Difficulty in locating persons and to persuade them to come and speak in our lecture series. This is the 7th Kumar Gandharva lecture. Earlier speakers have been Mukund Lat, T.M. Krishna, Vijay Kichlu, Deepak Raja, Neela Bhagwat, and Sumangala Damodaran. Music is a field which the musicians seldom speak publicly. Privately, they are very interesting and they offer you all kinds of interesting insights. One of them I'm reminded of was narrated to me by the great Marathi poet Vinda Karandikar, who had gone to meet Bade Ghulam Ali Khan somewhere in Bombay. And during the conversation, Bade Ghulam Ali Khan ने कहा कि मौसीकी तो मूरत जैसी है, कुछ कम तो बहुत कम, कुछ ज़्यादा तो बहुत ज़्यादा. Now, I mean, someone should really do a research, or I don't know what, at least put together an account of these private mahfil sayings by musicians. They will not say it publicly because they hardly publicly ever speak. They sing or play or whatever. So this year we have friend Irfan Zuberi, who has been working in the domain of arts and cultural heritage for about 2 decades. And he has led projects at important cultural organizations such as the Ravi Shankar Center, Aga Khan Trust for Culture, Nath Sagar Archives and Documentation Society for South Asian Music, and the Indira Gandhi National Center of the Arts. He is completing at the moment his doctorate at the University of Tübingen in Germany, and he is finalizing for us a biography of Pandit Mallikarjun Mansoor, for which the Raza Foundation was very happy to offer him a fellowship, and we have been now anxiously waiting. And of course, the date of the biography, the script of the biography reaching us keeps on getting postponed. One of the problems, I'm told, is that some of the rare photographs, the photographers have become very difficult to handle financially. For a single photograph of Mallikarjun Mansoor, they want to charge 6,000 rupees. Since we are a non-profit charitable trust, it's somewhat difficult for us to make such huge payments. But anyway, we are trying to sort this out. So there you are, Irfan Zuberi. After he has spoken, there will be occasion for you to offer brief comments. Brevity will be more important than comment. However, you can ask clarifications or engage him in a conversation after he has delivered his lecture. So, Irfan Zuberi.
Thank you, Ashok ji. It's a real honor for me to be part of this wonderful series. I think there are very, very few organizations around the country which focus memorial lectures on the performing arts. And it's a real yeoman effort by the Raza Foundation to do lectures on theatre, on music, on dance. There is anyway a paucity of good quality scholarship on the performing arts emerging from India, but this is a very good platform. Having said that, I knew that I would be grilled about the biography, and rightly so. It's been a challenge, but it's been a worthy challenge. It's been fun to discover so much information about a musician who passed away more than 3 decades ago. But there are still family members, there are grandchildren, there are disciples of disciples, and there are people who had been long-time fans of this musician, so they have kept a lot of his material, including rare postcards or letters he wrote to them so safely. So one of the joys really has been to discover all these personal belongings in the collections of a lot of musicians, scholars, disciples, as well as connoisseurs. Okay, so for this lecture, I'll be speaking for about half an hour. It's a written, finished text on the theme which is before you. Talking about the context of performance of Hindustani music in the early part of the 20th century, scholar Anand Kumaraswamy wrote that the art music of India exists only under cultivated patronage and in its own intimate environment. It is the chamber music of an aristocratic society where the patron retains musicians for his own entertainment and for the pleasure of the circle of his friends. The public concert is virtually unknown, and the livelihood of the artist does not depend upon his ability and the will to amuse the crowd. In other words, the musician is protected. Under these circumstances, he is under no temptation to be anything but a musician. His education begins in infancy, and his art remains a vocation. I think it is safe to say that by the turn of the 21st century and the years that have followed, much of this has changed. With the cessation of princely patronage, which began to decline around the middle of the 19th century, but lasted in some cases until independence, musicians had to start looking elsewhere for support. During the first 3 decades of the 20th century, 4 institutions emerged, which eventually came to provide the basis of new networks of patronage. And these 4 are recording, radio, public concerts, and teaching institutions. Consequently, as the patronage base became increasingly dependent on the heterogeneous many of the city rather than the homogeneous few of the court, professional musicians started situating themselves in areas of high population density where they could attract a large listening public. To grapple with the topic at hand, I will be dividing this lecture into 4 sections: recording industry, broadcasting industry, celebrity culture and corporatization of Hindustani music, and finally the emergent paradigm shift towards creative and cultural industries. The first, recording industry. The advent of sound recording technology fundamentally altered Indian music in the 20th century. Its most significant consequence was that, for the first time, the musical sound could be disembodied and disconnected from the musicians themselves. The ability to reproduce music on demand meant that the sound could now be heard in the houses and drawing rooms of literally thousands of people who had never seen the musician before. This is a radical notion itself. The technology of recorded sound meant that musical sound was now exposed as a resource capable of mass production. This mass production and commodification meant that music had entered a new form of economic transaction that was to have significant and ongoing ramifications. In the words of scholar Jacques Attali, this mutation would profoundly transform every individual's relationship to music. And this is the most fundamental point of all, really. Recording and sound technology fundamentally altered things. two things began to happen when sound amplification was used in public concerts. First, because the music was needed to be heard by a large audience in a physical space, the overall volume of sound produced by musicians had to be electronically increased. The quality of this sound was then, in turn, reliant on both the sounds of music for the performer and the listener was also somehow fundamentally altered. Thus, Hindustani classical musicians found themselves at the intersection of two worlds, both musically and culturally. By the middle of the 20th century, older forms of musical patronage by the Rajas and Nawabs had all but disappeared. The new patrons of music were the urban middle classes, and the locus of musical activity shifted from the courts to large urban centers such as Delhi, Bombay, and Calcutta. Within the span of one generation, Indian musicians could look back to a vanishing world of princely patronage and look forward to a new commercial environment fraught with economic and artistic uncertainties. The place of work was no longer the rarefied courts, but it was the urban theatre, recording studio, concert stage, or one of the many schools that were being established at the time. At such a time, correspondence in the EMI archive reveals the forward planning and logistical problems being encountered during the period leading up to Fred Geisberg's first set of Indian recordings in the early 1900s. John Watson Hord, the company's agent in Calcutta, was aware of the potential of recording native musicians and was constantly urging the London office to send an expedition. But Hord was also aware that they had to corner the market quickly, as rival operators were already importing gramophones and records into India. Indeed, much of the early correspondence was concerned with establishing markets, trademarks, and franchises through lawsuits reflecting commercial concerns. Hord's interest in Indian music appeared to be purely on the level of business. As he put it in June 1902, the native music to me is worse than Turkish. But as long as it suits them and sells, what do we care? The first recording of Indian musicians, made on 8th November 1902, featured two Nautch girls, Soshi Mukhi and Fani Bala, of the Classic Theatre in Calcutta. They sang extracts from popular theatre shows of the time, such as Sri Krishna, Dole Leela, Pramod Ranjan, and Ali Baba. According to Fred Geisberg, who recorded them, they had miserable voices. So this is the first reception of Indian music on recording. Following the first tour, the executives of the company quickly realized that they were sitting on a potentially huge market for their new product. Thomas Addis took over from Hord in 1903 as the firm's agent and was an energetic and tireless promoter of the company's Indian market, including the native or vernacular list. Thus, the company expressed its desire from manufacturing the gramophone as a novelty to begin with and a status symbol to move towards a scenario where it would be consumed by the masses. On 8 June 1905, Addis noted that all 300 copies of L.C. Boral's recordings were sold within half an hour of the time that they were open. So this is the extent of the market, right? Another indication of the rapid strides made by the company in India is that over 500 titles were recorded during Fred Geisberg's first visit in 1902. In 1904-05, his colleague Darby returned to record more than 1,200 titles. And in 1906, Fred Geisberg's younger brother, Will Geisberg, recorded 1,350 titles on his tour. Unfortunately, a large part of this early recorded repertoire has been lost, but there are few collectors who've retained a number of these early 78 RPM recordings. The first recordings were pressed in Europe, but in late 1907, a record pressing plant was built in Calcutta to serve India and Southeast Asia. In 1909, the factory had the capacity to press 1,000 records daily, which was soon to be increased to 5,000. This would imply an annual production going up to 150,000 records being pressed annually. thus giving a sufficient idea of the kind of demand even in the early years of the recording industry in India. However, it needs to be noted that feedback from the audience is an important ingredient in Indian music performances. As the performance unfolds, the audiences interject exclamations of approval and astonishment at virtuoso passages. This crucial interplay was absent from the recording situation, by virtue of which an important source of musical inspiration and affirmation was denied to the performers. Thus, in a sense, the early recordings are no more than snapshots of genres and styles of performance. But the recordings also give us clues as to how musicians dealt with the short amount of time available on disc and provide insights into the nature of Indian musical form and the flexibility of its structure. On disc, time constraints throw the essential structural features of music into sharp relief. Musical devices, which usually enjoy detailed extemporization and exploration in live performances, get compressed down to short gestures in recordings. In this way, features of Indian musical form are poured through the sieve of recording technology and time limitation until only the essentials remain. Scholar Jerry Farrell goes as far as to suggest that one possible effect of the duration on early recordings was to lead artists to give greater weight to the composed or fixed parts of the performances than they would normally have done in live recitals. Vidushi Gangubai Hangal, recorded in the early 1930s, acknowledged the impact of the early recordings on her in the following way, and I quote from her authorized autobiography. On my way to school, I used to listen to the gramophone records of Hindustani music from a wayside shop. I particularly liked the records of Srimati Zohrabai Agrewali. Shripad Rao Tamhankar, a harmonium player, was quite closely known to us. Apart from repairing harmoniums, he used to sell gramophone records in his shop. I used to listen to the gramophone records for hours together, forgetting everything else. I liked a particular song by Zohrabai, Aan Baan Jia Mein Lagi. It's in Rag Gara. So much and listened to it so many times that I learnt it by heart. Little would she have known at the time that she would herself grow into a musician sought after by the recording companies in the coming years. A few days prior to her mother's death in 1932, representatives of HMV visited Hubli in search of new talent. They signed an agreement with her and her mother to record a few titles, but as ill luck would have it, her mother passed away before she could be recorded. However, Gangubai did go to Bombay to keep the commitment of the contract, and she recounts the experience thus. Shri Roopji of HMV company called me and my escorts to the recording studio. An engineer from England had specially come for the purpose of our recording. A number of young artists from different places had been called, and all of us were housed in a hotel in Girgaon in South Bombay. Each artist was to select 12 titles consisting of Geet, Ghazal, semi-classical. No artist was paid any fee for these recordings, nor did anyone expect the same. However, it was an enjoyable experience for all participants, who were more than pleased that HMV looked after travel, accommodation, food arrangements, and as well as sightseeing in Bombay. So this was the reward they got. I had to make a second trip to Bombay for another recording session with HMV. This time I recorded a few classical compositions and received some payment in cash. D.V. Paluskar, who was also recorded around this time, used to refer to the payment as Sakshatkar. He often used to remark jocularly, the mehfil went off well, but the Sakshatkar was not satisfactory. So I think the same can be said of these early recordings, which hardly paid the artists, and there was no notion of royalties or anything. And Zohrabai Agrewali's recordings are hot sellers even to date, so more than 100 years. For another eminent vocalist from Karnataka, recording was to have an even bigger impact on his life. The year 1935 was the turning point in the life of young Mallikarjun Mansoor by his own admission. One evening, I was in Vishnu Pant Pagnis's shop. He had risen to fame with the play Sant Tukaram. All of a sudden, the great Ustad Manji Khan Sahab entered the shop. Tall, broad and handsome with enchanting eyes, he was the heir to the musical legacy of Sangeet Samrat Ustad Allah Diya Khan Sahab. He had carved a niche for himself in the world of music with his unique talent. Vishnu Pant greeted Khan Sahab with respect. Aadab arz hai, aiye, tashrif rakhiye. Amidst their animated conversation, Vishnu Pant introduced me to Khan Sahab. Young Mallikarjun Mansoor has made quite a name for himself. He often gives recitals and many of his HMV records have become quite popular. Yet he is burning with the desire to learn more. If a stalwart like you would accept him as a disciple, he could be molded to be an artist beyond compare. Khan Sahab responded by saying, I must listen to one of his records. At once, Pagnis took Khan Sahab to a nearby shop which sold gramophones. He then played my rendition in Gaud Malhar and Adana. After listening to me, the Ustad turned to me and said, this boy will definitely be able to master my music. The rest, as they say, is history. Soon to be detailed out in the biography. The second section is on the broadcasting industry. The birth of broadcasting in India can be traced back to 1924, when the Madras Presidency Radio Club started a broadcasting service. Its range was only 8 kilometers, but it was still an impressive achievement in those days. This radio club was run only on an experimental basis and could not continue beyond 3 years for want of funds. Coinciding with it, another effort was made by the Young Men's Christian Association by opening a new radio station in Lahore. Simultaneously, the Corporation of Madras started a regular service from 1st April 1930, broadcasting music for 2 hours daily from 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. every day. By 1934, though, the government of India had come to the conclusion that it would undertake extension and development plans for broadcasting. P.C. Edmonds was appointed the first controller of broadcasting in 1934, and it was decided to set up a station in Delhi. But the real extension work started with the arrival of Lionel Fielden of BBC, whose appointment marks the beginning of the coordinated development of broadcasting in India. And several of the present-day customs in broadcasting can be traced back to his initial efforts. According to Fielden, music was padding because it does not instruct or inform, even if it made up 7/8 of all broadcasting time. So the importance of music for initial stages of broadcasting cannot be understated. However, in Fielden's opinion, Indian music had no accepted standards, and the only distinction between classical and light music was in the content of the words, which could either be religious or erotic, and the social status of the performer himself or herself. However, as with recording, artists did not take to broadcasting too seriously in the initial stages. The professional musicians were a little slow in taking to radio, especially the top musicians of the time. For one, the fee offered, the Sakshatkar again, was not attractive enough. Apart from that, as mentioned earlier, the mood of the artist during the performance depended mostly on appreciative responses given by audience members. The artists were used to performing in front of live audiences, and it was very unusual for them not to sing or play to an audience. Additionally, the tyranny of a specified duration of each sitting at All India Radio put them off. However, the publicity which the performance over radio brought them and the respect with which they were treated by the staff gradually ended breaking their resistance and inhibitions about taking part in radio programs. Vidushi Gangubai Hangal's remarks about the radio are as insightful as her observations about the early years of the recording. The year 1936 was a significant year since my name, announced as Gangubai Hangal, attained fame and gave further impetus to my career. The program went live on the air from 9:30 to 11 p.m. And as soon as the program was over, a number of telephone calls were received by AIR Bombay. Which is this new voice? Who is the artist? The listeners were anxious to know. The rag Miyan Ki Malhar and the style of presentation had a distinct mark of the Kirana Gharana. From then on, my programs were being broadcast regularly from AIR Bombay, and this involved the need to prepare and practice regularly. However, in those days, the artists had to present the programs in 3 sessions, which is still more or less the same. Not much has changed, with appropriate ragas for broadcast during the morning, afternoon, and night transmissions. We were expected to submit a list of 25 ragas to All India Radio, from which the final selection would be made. This was with a view to ensure that the same ragas were not repeated by different artists within a short period of time. However, and here is the problem, the pace of learning from Guruji, and in our case this is Pandit Savai Gandharva, was very slow, systematic and thorough. And it was rather inadequate to meet such a requirement from the radio. With a little guidance, I used to select the ragas from Sri Bhatkande's book on Hindustani music. Needless to say then, my knowledge about such ragas was bookish. I think it's incredible how honest she is in her admission about the initial phase of her career on radio. As part of the endeavor of nation building following independence, a series of national cultural policies and objectives were formulated by the Government of India. These objectives were, of course, not unrelated to broader national political goals, such as the wide-ranging policies of national integration, social unity, and the preservation and promotion of India's cultural heritage. Networks of patronage were established through state institutions and bureaucracies with the aim of furthering such objectives. However, it is not unreasonable to suggest that the institutionalization of patronage after independence, by and large, tended to favor educated middle-class musicians over those perceived to belong to the old ways. A term which carried a host of connotations ranging from illiterate, uneducated, morally suspect, or just trapped in the past. Individuals identified as such were necessarily at a disadvantage in dealing with the new bureaucratic milieu that emerged after independence. Section 3, Celebrity Culture and the Corporatization of Hindustani Music. Coming to more recent times, the genesis and growth of corporate parlance and euphemisms in the language of promoters, musicians, and media are symptomatic of the growing influence of corporate networks on the lives of musicians. From the corporate perspective, concerts and festivals are increasingly referred to as events. It is common knowledge that association with a world-class event can give a company the kind of credibility and competitive advantage that no other medium can. The need for corporate association has grown even further due to the present scale of performance fees paid to celebrity musicians who are routinely known to charge anything upwards of 5 lakhs per event, depending on the nature of the event and the company profile. Accompanying this, a new and influential cadre of brokers known as event managers largely manage the interface between the corporate world and aspiring musicians who wish to be a part of this network of patronage. This kind of intervention of professional brokers between musician and patron marks a significant development in the ecosystem of Hindustani music that in the past had been characterized by a direct exchange between the two groups. The coupling of the market economy with the endeavor of music has also created a new need, that of the media celebrity. Observing how collective corporate activity and globalization have valorized select commodity brand names in the marketplace, it is not surprising that within the business of Hindustani music, a coterie of musical celebrities has also been valorized and turned into brand names. The result of this tendency, unfortunately, is that the rest of the musicians, young or old, established or aspiring, turn into unbranded commodities, or even non-commodities, by the logic of negation. The media celebrity figure thus becomes the dominant and public sign of success, and automatically an icon for aspiring musicians. Adding to this scenario is the fact that what confers or withholds celebrityhood on a musician cannot be described with any precision. The 24 or so current celebrities possess no single criterion with which their celebrityhood can be associated. A musician's celebrity status fundamentally exists within and is generated by media and other commercially driven agendas such as advertising. Thus, while a musician's skill, artistry, and musical status no doubt can go a long way in the conferral of celebrity status, it is certainly not the only criterion by which a celebrity is created in these days. The post-liberalization Hindustani musician now addresses an international market of a considerable size and diversity. According to Deepak Raja, today's market for classical music consists of about 20% cognoscenti and 80% of what he terms the innocenti. The rewards of addressing only the cognoscenti are now beyond the reach of most musicians, while the risks associated with ignoring the innocenti have become practically unaffordable. Hindustani music now finds it profitable to address the lowest common denominator by keeping itself accessible, intellectually less demanding, and familiar. It might be a bit provocative to say this, but this reality defines contemporary Hindustani music more comprehensively than most professional musicians would like to admit. There seems to be ample ground to make the assertion that the Hindustani music scene is hurtling towards the familiar, predictable, and even the titillating. A great deal of Hindustani music now challenges the dividing line between art and entertainment. This can be seen in various performance scenarios. Apart from obliging sections of the audience in a concert, which is usually funded by corporate business houses, there is an increased emphasis on virtuosity and technique. Other strategies which appear to emphasize and value novelty per se have also emerged in recent years. To conclude the discussion on technology and its associated developments, one can make the assertion that recording, broadcasting, public concerts, and events have brought about a significant difference in the artist-audience relationship. While the advent of the television transformed music into a visual art, the microphone increased the physical distance between the two and affected the level of artistic communication, which was so vital in the creation of music during actual performance. In an incisive passage from her book, eminent vocalist Dr. Prabha Atre makes the following observation regarding the overall shift of emphasis within the world of Hindustani music in recent times. A new society was born where the artist looked at his art as a saleable commodity, and the audience perceived art as a piece of entertainment. This marks a significant attitudinal change from earlier times when art was sacrosanct and the artist was a figure of near divinity. The last section, emergent paradigm shift towards creative and cultural industries. During this lecture, I have dealt with the broad timeline from the early 20th century to the first quarter of the 21st century, which we currently inhabit. In the 20th century, we lived at a time that witnessed a shift from supporting the arts to supporting the cultural industries, as represented through the case of music, in the case of music by recording, broadcasting, as well as the gradual establishment of tendencies associated with corporatization, which we have just discussed. However, at the turn of the 21st century, the discourse started shifting once again, this time from supporting the cultural industries towards fostering creative industries. And this shift is reflective of an evolution in economic thinking. The culture industry thesis had proposed that in the objects of mass culture, commodification reaches its extreme with use value being replaced by exchange value. At its most basic level, this can be understood as referring to the fact that people are only capable of evaluating aesthetic objects based upon their value in the marketplace. While the culture industry does not hide the fact that its products are designed for sale, it also markets them as satisfying the needs and desires of its customers. And herein lies the genius of the system itself and how it has been openly able to combine these two claims. Quoting Theodore Adorno, the words enjoyment of art sound funny to me. He says at another place, making music, listening to music, reading with all my attention, these activities are part and parcel of my life. To call them hobbies would be to make a mockery of them. It is not unreasonable then to say that under the reign of the culture industry, culture is made specifically for the purpose of being sold. Production is subordinated to distribution, and the promise of art is thereby dissolved, at least partially. Hindustani vocalist Pandit Vidyadhar Vyas echoes similar apprehensions in his writing on the decline of gharanas. Quote, the market economy conditions and considerations with motivated trade practices are entering in the field of music very rapidly. For the young or old musician, it is not enough now to learn and produce good music, but it is more important to know how to sell it. It needs to be foregrounded that the shift in terminology from cultural industries to creative industries reflects a new wave in information society and knowledge economy driven by innovation. On the positive side, it helps in providing a robust economic justification for culture and creating conditions for mobilization of cultural investment. However, on the flip side, not only is it the subject of unceasing debate around ambiguous notions of creativity and innovation, but also for its neoliberal implications in terms of furthering of a market-centered and reductive view of culture itself. Alongside, it is also important to note that this logic extends from the creative industries to the creative class, the creative economy, and finally the creative city. The Creative Cities network of UNESCO focuses on 8 creative fields: architecture, crafts and folk art, design, film, gastronomy, literature, media arts, and music. Out of the 350 cities globally that currently possess the Creative City tag, 8 Indian cities are included, of which Varanasi, Chennai, and Gwalior are featured with a focus on the parameter on music. The cities that form part of this global network are expected to work towards a common objective of placing creative and cultural industries at the heart of their developmental plans and cooperating actively at the global level. However, it needs to be kept in mind that there are inherent problems within this system. For instance, Mumbai is designated as a creative city of film, but it is equally a strong contender for being considered a creative city of music. Similarly, within the broader UNESCO system, Kolkata and Delhi are represented for intangible and tangible cultural heritage, but are not considered creative cities of music, despite having been important centers of music for several centuries. However, lest we digress, let us return to the fate of music within this emergent paradigm shift. The split is much more between, on the one hand, music which accepts its character as commodity, thus becoming identical with the workings of the creative and cultural industries, and on the other hand, self-reflective music which critically opposes its fate as commodity and at times ends up alienating itself from present-day society. At the reception stage, this second reflective kind of music demands what Adorno had called structural listening, a form of listening whereby the listener hears the parts in the relation to the whole. So a very active and engaged listening practice. With this, I would like to loop back to the music of a generational musician such as Pandit Kumar Gandharva, who prompted the ecosystem of Hindustani music to reconsider what it meant to sing khayal, and presented an alternative model of musicianship itself. The questions he posed to the tradition from within the tradition continue to serve as inspiration to musicians who have chosen the path of being fearlessly reflective, even though they currently might be stranded in a sea of the unthoughtful. Thank you.
Friends, you have gone through both a historical and also an insightful account of what happened to music in more than 100 years. So, if there are any questions, brief comments. Yes, please. The mic will come.
Thank you, sir. It's a great lecture. I just wondered if you thought of anything that Raza said about the influence of classical music on film music, and especially starting with Feroz Dastoor's songs in Hindu Samay. I think Feroz Dastoor's song, of course, as you noted, I think 20 odd films, and then, of course, Amir Khan's song, Alustar Samay, Nirvana. So many other artists have contributed to the early 30 years of the film industry, also in regional cinema, Bengali and Marathi. So I wondered why you did not consider or mention film.
I mean, I could have delved much more onto the film industry scenario, but I've focused on the core elements of the culture industry, which are recording, broadcasting, and the public concert, really. That is a whole another domain, of course, with the with the coming of the sound recording and its interface with film technology. And in the early decades of the sound recording technology with theatre as well as with film, there was a lot of active engagement by classical musicians, but then also, it is also a fact that kept declining significantly, also because it was only some of the very early composers who gave that kind of space and freedom. One of the earlier kind of form of Hindi film song, so to say, we talk just about Bollywood, it had the flexibility of being 8 to 10 minutes long, and that gave space for a lot of artists such as Baluskar ji or Amir Khan to delve deep into it. The same as they did with Khayal, but also in other genres like Thumri and also with Qawwali and other genres. However, as the time duration of the Hindi film song kept decreasing over a period of time, that became harder and harder. And there is a lot of scholarship on Hindi film music and its interface with classical music and Khayal in particular in Maharashtra. But that's not really the my expertise, and I would refer you to the writings of Professor Gregory Booth, who has worked a lot on music in Bollywood, especially in the early years, focusing a lot on composers like Khayyam and several others who themselves were very, very classically trained.
How much you feel the quality is lost between unplugged and
Hold it closer to your mouth.
Between unplugged and amplified. I don't think it's a question of quality loss. It's got to do with the quality of the sound system which is used in plugged scenarios and the way a musician is able to adapt to it. I mean, for instance, some instruments, for instance, let's say the Rudra Veena, may not be very adequate unless it is literally 2 or 3 people sitting around the musician to function without some sort of amplification, which will add to the enjoyment of the listeners. But then again, I think all of us have attended unamplified mehfils, which also have a real great character, and you really enjoy it in a very different way. I'm reminded of one instance of Pandit Yashwant Bua Joshi of the Gwalior and Agra Gharanas. He had come to perform for Spick McCabe. This is about more than 20 years back. And he was performing at the Delhi School of Economics, and all of a sudden the electricity went out. So I can never forget his gesture. He literally picked up the mic and placed it on the side, and he said that the person at the end will be able to hear me, that is my training. But that unfortunately was that generation. Now, the current generation, the people who are, let's say, 50 and below, are not very used to singing or performing without amplification. And also now with the refinement of sound technology, like with phantom mics which can be attached inside the board of the veena, or contact mics on sarod and sitar, or adding reverb and things to make your voice more attractive to listeners. it's become now part and parcel of the Guru Shishya Parampara itself to be trained how to sing in amplified scenarios. And I saw someone like Dr. Prabha Atre teach her students how to sing in front of the mic, how to modulate your voice. So I think it's become a reality which we cannot escape from. I think it's only very few novelty scenarios where still there are mehfils which are unamplified, maybe home concerts in some cases, but now it's a reality which has become completely all-encompassing.
It's called milking the mic.
Yeah.
It's a technique. I remember trying to teach playing sound once. My question was, what about nowadays, you talk about the industry, recording industry, but now with things like YouTube, where artists can go directly, in a sense, to their audience, is that making an impact, hopefully?
It's definitely making an impact in the sense that there is again an establishment of a kind of immediacy, even though it is through technology or through the platform of technology like YouTube or SoundCloud or Spotify or whatever it is. But the intervention of technology remains, firstly. Secondly, for a musician to also dabble in doing this, he or she has to take time away from other things, which could possibly be more focused on their own practice or their own learning and teaching. For instance, Pandit Nikhil Banerjee once said that I am not going to focus so much on recording and promoting my music. I hardly find time to teach people because I would rather spend the time with myself and my instrument. So that time, it is that time which is being cut into through this. But having said that, there is an overall kind of democratization of music which any kind of technology has fostered, whether recording or broadcasting. I mean, so many people would have never gotten the chance of listening to someone like Ustad Fayaz Khan Sahab because he sang only in the courts of Baroda, right? Unless until it was for the recording industry, and we have examples. But then again, I feel that these are tasks which are not the focal point of for the artist to give their time to, really. It can be something which which possibly can be done by others, either brokers or intermediaries, who can help the artists with these things so that they can remain a little more focused and worry-free.
More and more artists are also teaching.
Of course.
Media, so it can be hopefully.
Yeah. That, of course, COVID made a huge difference in the recent years. It had started much earlier, but COVID and the pandemic made a huge difference to a lot of, I think it made a difference in education all over, across the entire length and breadth of the spectrum, and music was no different in that case.
I have a small question. I have spoken to some artists who perform on events, and usually these event managers pack 3 or sometimes even 4 artists in the same evening to make it more popular. Now that even compresses their time for performance, and they say we simply can't perform in those 10 or 15 minutes that are allowed to us. So that's a difficulty. Would you like to see something like that?
Yeah, I think musicians, all artists are incredibly flexible and adaptive to all kinds of scenarios, right? Mallikarjun Mansoor has written about in his autobiography that he was once asked by Canara Bank to perform in a village where the 1000th branch of Canara Bank was being inaugurated. And the entire audience was villagers and farmers who had no background in classical music. And yet, he connected with them and he sang vachanas, and he even interspersed a Bahaduri Todi in the middle to make them listen to classical music without anyone realizing. So I think artists are generally very, very flexible and adaptive to different situations, even these kind of events. They tend to just focus on repeating what is most familiar and easy for them to reproduce. There are parts of our music which are composed. There are, of course, large parts of our music which are improvised and extemporized, but there are fixed and composed parts. So in these kind of scenarios, artists tend to favor composed parts. You give me 30 minutes, I'm going to play for 30 minutes exactly and stop. I think Ashokji had once told about Mansoorji himself in front of the then President of India, singing exactly for 30 minutes and stopping. So even artists of that generation knew how to. And the coming of the recording technology with the 3.5 minutes 78 RPM record, what can be more limiting than that? You know, to sing a khayal for 3.5 minutes and to be recorded and also insert your name's announcement at the end. Yeah, so it cannot be more binding than that. So artists find a way to adapt themselves, but it's a whole other matter whether they should be made to do this. I think the intent behind it is a different thing, but whether they can do it, yes they can. I've seen even someone, an artist, a superstar of our times, play 4 concerts in a day. So anything is possible. But the point is whether we think of them as artists or artistic labor. That's the real
Extravaganza or
Somebody can. Yes.
Thank you, sir. I must compliment Zuberi for a very fine lecture. There is a puritanical spirit in which we try to run down the commercialization of music. And we forget that the artist has to also survive.
Of course.
And we always talk about saying that the khayal singing will go for 3 hours and then the audience will sleep and so on and so forth. Now the times have changed now, the younger generation has no time, and the challenge for the artist will have to be draw them into. Plus the society will have to find ways to fund the, we did it.
Yeah.
I think my company almost spent few crores in sponsoring young artists. The point which I am trying to say is that if you don't do that, and if you don't improvise, the classical music is going to die, because you have a competition with Yo-Yo Honey Singh on the one hand and Pandit Jasraj on the other. I will give you one very specific example.
Sure.
In Rajasthan, we tried to fund the Dagas, but the Drupad is dying with all the efforts. Drupad is not on the horizon. So what is your take on all this?
I think the first thing I'd like to say is that the fears of the demise of the classical arts is greatly exaggerated. It has survived thousands of years and will continue. Whether it is meant for, I don't think that competition is between Pandit Jasraj and Yo-Yo Honey Singh. There is never going to be enough audience for Pandit Jasraj, no matter how much publicity and how much extravaganza and how much novelty you pump into an event featuring Pandit Jasraj. It will still not come anywhere close to the vicinity of attracting stadiums filled with crowd which will come for Yo-Yo Honey Singh, right? So it's totally, it's like comparing, I'm sorry, but it's kind of like comparing apples and oranges. I don't think classical musicians aspire for that kind of popularity also, unless until they are playing in a commercial scenario. I have seen classical musicians who form part of bands, and those bands perform to these kind of audiences which are in thousands. Unless until if you are someone like Pandit Ravi Shankar at the Woodstock, you know, and that is a generational talent and that is a generational event which happened once or twice in a lifetime. So, but I do agree with you that the tendency towards commercialization and the ongoing scenario that we currently live in is inescapable, and that is a reality that the artist must make peace with. And I think it's different levels of making peace with this reality that the artists are really struggling with. Whether they should abandon all semblance of classicality and perform anywhere, anything, even if it is a 5-minute piece in a big band, or whether they would like to have options of performing what they have imbibed from their teachers and have extended Allah before a gath that they are playing, even if it is instrumental music. I think the 3-hour khayal is out completely now. In the last 10 years, I have hardly attended any concert unless until it is a ghar mehfil, where artist has performed for 3 hours. even big ticket performers like Pandit Jasraj that you mentioned, at the end of festivals in Kamani or at Savai Gandharva, would get about 1.5 hours to perform. And that is already a lot of adaptation that they are, adaptivity that they are doing to perform at those kind of platforms. So I don't think there is a fixed answer to your question, but there maybe in some cases we can just agree to disagree.
Thank you. I disagree.
Okay, that's fine, no problem.
Yes, thank you so much for this wonderful lecture and also for the comments. I think I found
Yeah.
found them quite insightful, especially I'm not a musicologist and therefore my question might be a bit naive. But I'm wondering, is this also in your expertise or maybe a part of your PhD to look at how perhaps the notion of personhood itself of the artist changes in relation to the art itself? Because when we were talking about art, I was also thinking of Benjamin and art in the age of mechanical reproduction. How do current modern contemporary artists and their relationship to art and how that has changed historically? I'd be really interested to know more.
That's fascinating. Thank you for bringing Benjamin into the thing, because I mentioned Adorno and you cannot talk about Adorno without his debate with Benjamin, really. And I think the writing on work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction, and Adorno responds by writing about regression of listening and how we end up talking a lot about how it has impacted the artist, but also what Adorno then shifts the emphasis to it, how is it impacted the audiences as well, the coming of the technology. But to come back to what you were talking about, artists and their own identity and things like that within this changing and evolving scenario. I think I'll come back to saying something about how incredibly flexible the structure of the music tradition itself is, and how it inculcates that flexibility into the nature of the artist himself or herself. So the same artist can, as based on the conversation just now, they can sing a 3-hour Ghar Mehfil. They can then the next day perform a 5-minute composed piece in a recording studio, and the next day be part of a band which is doing fusion of classical and contemporary music. So I think as far as artists are concerned, there has been some amount of detachment between what they perceive of themselves in the identity of being an artist. In some ways they are catering to requirements in different scenarios, right? And that is becoming more from the shift from the cultural industry to the creative economy and all of that, where innovation itself becomes currency, right? So the more you innovate, the more you are, oh wow, this is a very, what a great artist, they're doing so much innovation. But for a traditional musician to be doing innovation within a tradition which itself has innovation inbuilt into it, so then you are asking the artist to step out of the tradition and do novelty and things which get perceived as innovation, but perhaps might not be innovation themselves. So there is a little bit of I mean, the artists that I have interacted with and talked to or learned with, there has been a lot of discomfort within them about interfacing with the changed realities. I think the earlier generation faced the most amount of shift. I mean, in a conversation with Dhondutai Kulkarni, she told me that she was born before independence. So she said that the shift from Raj Ashray to Lok Ashray has impacted us like nothing before. It has fundamentally altered how we think of our musical material and how we have to cater it to the people who are our listeners in front of us. Because she said that when we were performing in courts, we were performing in front of people, all of whom understood. They understood the lyrics, they understood the musical structure, they understood the rhythmic structure, and their appreciation was on point. But now, most of the artists are singing in front of audiences who end up clapping on tabla solos. Right? This is the reality. whether it's a vocal performance or an instrumental performance. So it's been a challenge for the musician in vis-a-vis his or her own identity and selfhood. We can talk more. Thank you.
Here.
Thank you for a lovely exposition on evolution of music in terms of the technology. But I just thought maybe you could reflect about, as this track of recording industry beginning in the 19th century, and then today we are talking about YouTube. But there has been another aspect, and that is the phenomena of diaspora. Which has also impacted the structure and the way the North Indian classical music has sort of evolved.
Yes.
So maybe any reflection on that?
Sure. Thank you so much for this. But first, let me suggest that one of the best books on this, Indian Music and the West, by Jerry Farrell, you must look at it. It's one of the most interesting works on this kind of aspect of diaspora. Unfortunately, what happened, there have been waves of discovery of Indian music within the diaspora, and also to non-Indian audiences within those scenarios. So the first wave was primarily instrumental music, because there was no barrier of language, right? So sitar, sarod, and that wave, or shanai, or tabla, all those instruments. So the first wave was represented primarily by these instrumentalists. And it is in this first wave that we have the great superstars of the previous generation. Ali Akbar Khan Sahab, Vilayat Khan Sahab, Pandit Ravi Shankar, Bismillah Khan Sahab, Shiv Kumar Sharma ji, Hari Prasad Chaurasia ji, all those people, L. Subramaniam, Zakir Bhai, and all of these people. The second wave of discovery was a bit more deep, and it was around Dhrupad. And the charm for that was a wholly another thing altogether when it came to Europe and also with America. The charm for it was to go back to the most ancient and the oldest form of Indian music. And again, the beauty of that second wave of discovery was also that whether it was the vocal alap or the instrumental Dhrupad, it again did not have as much of a barrier of language. The vocal alap could be enjoyed as an abstract form without an understanding of the language. It's only when the composition came that the performer had to take recourse of someone who can explain what the meaning is and then sing it. And then there has been now the third wave, which in the more recent times, where it has been a mix of classic, of instrumentalists, of khayaliyas, of Dhrupadiyas, all now. But now, this third wave is now possible because the first and the second wave ended up establishing audiences in the diaspora and in the non-Indian audience scenarios. But yes, it is a very, very crucial element in terms of the patronage network. The patronage network given to Indian music by the diaspora has been an incredibly important one. And even to date, artists who go on their first tour abroad, it's a huge thing, it's a big, big thing. And I mean, in this day and age, most of us do not think of it as a big thing, but for classical musicians, the first concert tour abroad continues to be a huge, huge thing, even in 2025. I don't know if I ended up answering, but this is an ongoing discussion. Yeah.
This is the last one. You will be the last one.
Thank you for a really inspiring lecture. I learned a lot. I'm not a musician myself, but I was wondering if you could speculate about the role of artificial intelligence that might come into picture for the music as well as the creators of the music. For example, GPT has a lot of influence on writers and the writing. I'm curious.
Are you a technology person yourself?
Not really,
okay.
But technology has impacted a lot of
Of course.
I'm a plant biologist.
Okay. I asked that because I didn't want to offend you. I think AI should keep outside of art. Really, if artists can produce art, it would be far better. I think if AI can help me with my laundry, it will be far better than helping me create khayal. Right? I mean, I think
I truly appreciate that.
But of course, there are aspects of this technology which are useful. For instance, automated transcription technologies and analysis tools which look at pitch and rhythm and those kind of parameters, very, very useful. And very, very interesting for the musician themselves to see how much their pitch and how much their rhythm and things vary during the course of a performance. There's a wonderful scholar, his name is Rajiv Bhatte. He's in Singapore. He's done a lot of work recording musicians in Singapore, focused on their interface with technology and looking at their gestures and things like that, to then understand how physical gestures are an outwardly manifestation of the movement of music within the body. So there's a lot of things which technology can help with, but God forbid it should not sing khayal, and it should not place in our, to be able for artists to do.
Very quick comment. I do research on music and impact on plants, and I can tell you that the synthesized music really has no impact compared to a live singing.
Oh, thank you.
Even plants can appreciate that.
Oh, this is good news. Thank you.
Thank you, Irfan, for a very rich and thoughtful survey of North Indian classical music. One of the abiding anxieties that I sensed in your lecture was the relationship between internal benchmarks and external benchmarks of musical excellence. And or the subjective benchmarks of musical excellence and the objective benchmarks of musical excellence. And this seems to be a widening tension in a space where the artist and the audience are trained in different languages, right? So on whom does the responsibility lie of trying to establish a bridge language between what the artist is trained under, or what are they singing about, where is it coming from, and the audience, which might be more sort of comprising more of the innocenti, as you pointed out, than the conscious sort of connoisseurs music.
I think the responsibility lies on both ends of the spectrum and also somewhere in between. It depends on how we are conversing and in what space are the musician and the audience conversing. If it is a dark auditorium with a well-lit stage where the performer is there and the performer has no idea whether there is even one person sitting there, there is no element of interaction, right? And this is increasingly becoming more and more common as the setting stage for performance of our arts, which are inherently chamber music and chamber arts, right, with a lot of interaction. In fact, some of the best recordings for me are the ones where I can hear a lot of interaction between the artist and the audience. And there is a lot of, in some cases, I know a lot of people, a lot of my friends who are not so fond of archival recordings as I might be. They find that to be the most irritating. That why is there so much interjection? Why is that person constantly talking to the musician while they are singing? But believe me, that musician in that context loved that. They enjoyed that a lot. So, to come back to what you're saying in terms of where the onus really lies and how we can try to achieve at a bridge, I think we cannot put the responsibility on one group altogether. The artists are themselves doing a lot in terms of making their music accessible. They are interfacing with technology, they are performing in different contexts, they are trying to cater to as many audience types as possible, given whatever networks of patronage they might be into. But the audience, for me, needs to work a little harder on its own listening practices. You see, I mean, it is one thing to get into classical music and start appreciating the familiar. And then you move towards the unfamiliar, and then you educate yourself about the unfamiliar, and then you invest some time and effort into understanding, maybe not the grammar, but understanding at least the structure or the architectonic of the music itself. And that is what structural listening is about. What Adorno says structural listening. That's deep listening, going from, okay, this is this raga, this is what it sounds like, this is teen tal, I can count the beats. But then to move from that to slightly more complex structures which are there within those grammatical frameworks, right? And to enjoy those, but it takes a lot of time and investment. And I think a lot of people lose interest or lose patience too quickly. And one of the reasons why popular music is popular, because it does not require any of this initiation and any of this level of understanding to enjoy it. It's primarily beat driven. You can enjoy, you can start tapping your feet, you can start moving. But in this kind of music, unless until the alarm of Drupad comes to the crescendo, you cannot even arrive at a position where you can start to understand the continuity between swaras. Till then it's so abstract. So it requires a lot of time and effort. But I feel, I'm totally biased of course, but I feel that it is worth putting in the effort. And when I started listening to classical music myself, in my late teens, I did not enjoy it as much, but then learning with musicians like Ustad Fainuddin Dagar, spending time with a lot of other artists, meeting them, talking to them, just hanging out, it helped a lot, and I feel much richer for it. So I can just say that.
Well, friends, there has been a very thought-provoking, is not a very good word, provoke some other things rather than thoughts only. But anyway, it was a very provocative lecture, and I think the discussion that followed was very interesting. I'll end with a small episode because it relates to what you were saying. We had a Mallikarjun Mansoor Prasang in Bhopal in 78 or 75, no, 78 perhaps. And one of the questions asked was, Pandit ji, जब आप गा रहे हो और सामने कोई ठीक वक्त पे दाद देने वाला बैठा हो, तो इससे आपके गाने में कोई फर्क पड़ता है? तो सारे लोग बोले ऐसा है, अभी तो ये अशोक वाजपेयी वगैरह ने मेरा झंडा उठा दिया, तो लोग आने लगे। पहले मेरा नाम अनाउंस होता था हाल खाली, मैंने खाली हाल में भी गाया है। मेरा काम है गाना, उसका काम है सुनना। अगर सुने तो ठीक है, नहीं सुने तो हमें क्या फर्क पड़ता है? That was also they have passed through this. I mean, a person like Mallikarjun Mansoor had passed through this, and as you mentioned, Venkatraman was the president, and he was coming to visit Bharat Bhavan. So I was asked if we should have a concert. And then we had a very stupid chief minister. Most chief ministers are stupid anyway. So he said to me, Karnataka music का किसको बोला है? मैं बोला अभी हमारे आ रहे हैं हम हिंदुस्तानी म्यूजिक का। तो बोले ठीक है तुम सेक्रेटरी से बात करो। So I talked to the secretary first. मुरारी करके होते थे, nice fellow. So I said, this is what we want. We want to invite the president of Indian Hindustani classical music. Mallikarjun Mansoor. Of course, you decide. I told Mallikarjun Mansoor, you will have only 45 minutes where they stay. And Mallikarjun Mansoor was a human computer. He said, ठीक 45 मिनट में खत्म कर दूंगा। हम तो वो चले जाए, फिर इंटरवल करते हैं, तो फिर आगे कॉन्सर्ट जाए। अब सारी सभा बैठी है, गवर्नर बैठे हैं, राष्ट्रपति बैठे हैं, मुख्यमंत्री बैठे हैं, कशिया बराबर मंत्री बैठे हैं और बहुत सारे लोग बैठे हैं। अब करीब 30 या 35 मिनट हुए तो उनका जो स्टाफ था उसकी बेचैनी शुरू हुई, मेरे पास आए, इसका वो कह रखा है तो वो 45 मिनट में खत्म कर। होते होते जब 45 मिनट, ठीक 45 मिनट घड़ी से खत्म, अब कोई उठे ना। मुझे बुलाया गया, कैसा बैठे won't he sing anymore? I said, sir, you have a state banquet. He said, I have state banquets every day. I don't have Mallikarjun Mansur every day. Please ask him to sing more. By the time this happened, because the president was there, and the president of India and Bharat is a kind of a philosopher, in terms of ये अरेंजमेंट लो, अरेंजमेंट क्या करो। तो वो जो बेचारा माइक वाला था, वो माइक को ऑफ करना भूल गया। तो माइक ऑन था, मैं गया, अब बत्तियाँ इतनी थी कि उनको ठीक से दिखाई नहीं दे रहा था। तो मैंने उनसे जब गया तो मुझे पहचान गया, कहाँ गए? अब वो सबने सुना, प्रेसिडेंट। मैं कह नहीं वो कह नहीं, वो कुछ और सुनना चाहे। हाँ, you know, Mallikarjun Mansur was one of those वो अगर उसकी कानपुरे की क्या कहते हैं जवारी ठीक कर रहे हो और अगर ठीक हो जाए तो यहीं से गाना शुरू करें। He would not even wait for 2 seconds to come to the mic. So there have been, and there have been 2 occasions. One, when the electricity went off in Rabindra Bhavan, it was Kumar Gandharva sang, and Kumarji kept on singing. 500 people sitting in the audience kept on listening. And the second time was Mallikarjun Mansur. Again, the electricity went off, he kept on singing. Because they were trained to throw the voice in such a way, and for them it is not. But आजकल के लोग जो माइक नहीं हो तो वो आवाज ना निकले। और इंस्ट्रूमेंटलिस्ट से तो बिल्कुल ही कमाल नहीं बनता है। Anyway, but that's it. Thank you very much.